Okay, going back. Let's see if Holly has some readings for this, understanding death and the hereafter. Moving on to that theme.
Do you want evanescence?
Sure, we can do that.
Or do you want infinite worlds of God?
A little of both. How about?
We'll have them both.
Sorry about that.
This is Abdu'l-Baha. O thou handmaid, aflame with the fire of God's love, grieve thou not over the troubles and hardships of this nether world, nor be thou glad in times of ease and comfort, for both shall pass away. This present life is even as a swelling wave, or a mirage, or drifting shadows. Could ever a distorted image on the desert serve as refreshing waters? No, by the Lord of Lords. Never can reality and the mere semblance of reality be one. And wide is the difference between fancy and fact, between truth and the phantom thereof. Know thou that the kingdom is the real world, and this nether place is only its shadow stretching out. A shadow hath no life of its own. Its existence is only a fantasy and nothing more. It is but images reflected in water, and seeming as pictures to the eye. You want the infinite, is that enough, or shall we go on?
No, give a couple more
Okay.
of those. We'll go on to that.
All right, this is Baha'u'llah. Verily I say, the creation of God embraceth worlds besides this world, and creatures apart from these creatures. In each of these worlds he hath ordained things which none can search except himself, the all-searching, the all-wise. Through the potency of the trees of divine revelation, through his potency, the trees of divine revelation have yielded their fruits, every one of which hath been sent down in the form of a prophet, bearing a message to God's creatures, in each of the worlds whose number God alone, in his all-encompassing knowledge, can reckon.
Thank you. One of the principles here that a difference in degree acts as a barrier between understanding. And Abdu'l-Baha cites in a number of his talks, he says that in the world of the mineral, in the world of the vegetable, we're walking on the earth ourselves, moving among the trees, and they have no means for comprehending that we are present with them in this world in a human condition, because their faculties don't allow for that perception. And he says, likewise, we have a faculty to live and be conscious in the next world, but that faculty in this life is blocked. And Baha'u'llah says the reason for that is that if we could see clearly the other world, we would all take our lives and it would cause disorder, complete disorder in society. So this is a gestation period. I'm sure you've seen the writings about that. This world is as a womb stage for the coming world. And the experiences we have here, we're developing certain qualities and attributes, which just as we were developing things in the womb of our mothers that we didn't know what they would be used for, in the end, we see in this life that we needed them. We need the power of sight and hearing and all the different sensorial powers that we gain from that. And this intellectual power, this rational power that enables us to discern truth from falsehood and so on. So that, he says, is one of the main reasons that we cannot see clearly into the next world. There's a wisdom in this that is not entirely discernible to us. But as you know from his talks, he also stresses that if this world which we just read about the evanescence and the passing lack of reality that this experience has, if this were the only world, if this were the real world, then creation would be absurd. That this is like a gestation period has to produce a fruit. The fruit is the consciousness that we have when we enter into the next realm. And that realm is then only the beginning of a series of realms, divorced from the material reality we have here, but not formless. One of the proofs in this regard, Baha'u'llah says that we've put in the world so that you could understand the reality of the soul and of eternal life, is the dream state. And we have different kinds of dreams, and Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha referred to different types of dreams that we have, but the reality of the dream world is an important one because it demonstrates to us that while we are asleep and our eyes are shut and not seeing, and our ears are shut and not hearing, and we're not feeling anything, and yet we're moving in another world and experiencing things there as if they were real in this world. So we may eat some delectable food in our dreams, we may fly in our dreams, we may see people that we haven't seen that have passed on in our dreams, all kinds of experiences of this sort. And as both the Baha'u'llah and the Master assure us, sometimes we see things in a dream which years later come to pass. It's a world divorced from time and space. It's the all-encompassing reality. It's the kingdom of God. It is the real world, and what we live in is a vague semblance of that world, a reflection of it, if you will. And sometimes he degrades it even more, this dust heap of a mortal world, he calls it at one place. Nobody is happy here. Somebody said, but Abdu'l-Baha, don't you think that justice requires the reincarnation so we can come back? Because maybe one time we had wealth here, some people had wealth, and I was poor, and he was sick, and I was well, and I don't know, how does all that work itself out? And Abdu'l-Baha, to one lady that asked him about reincarnation, he said to her, no merciful God would ever make a soul pass through this world twice. There's no reward in it, you know. He says, if you observe carefully, the rich and the wealthy and the powerful are suffering just the same as the poor and the innocent. Because that's the nature of this world. There's always something trying us. So, grieve thou not over the troubles and hardships of this nether world, nor be glad in times of ease and comfort, for both shall pass away. And of course, you can remember hidden words that echo very clearly this concept and this truth. So, he tells us that though we may in this life experience things that we don't want to experience or we wish we hadn't had to experience, yet in the long run, these wonderful, endless, glorious worlds of God, we will attain one by one to all of them. He gives a very enviable position to the believers, those who have recognized the greatest name, those who have recognized the coming of Baha'u'llah are in quite a different condition from those who don't know about them, or God help their dear souls who have rejected him. Now maybe they'll be able to say, well, I rejected him because so-and-so gave me such a distorted message that I couldn't understand it. Now, that's not going to go well on your record, but we should try to, in such a way, attract the souls that if they reject it, it's because they actually haven't recognized the light. And some of them say, well, I'm a good Christian and that's good enough. It really isn't good enough. Despite, the teachings are pretty strong about what it says about if you don't recognize Baha'u'llah and his words when he comes, then you really have never recognized the Christ in the first place. And we don't put that on the billboards, but it's there, and we need to wisely introduce the cause to souls so that they will be able to embrace the faith. And we should never introduce something in the course of our teaching work that can act as an obstacle for people. After all, the whole purpose of the cause of God and teaching is to attract people to the divine reality, to the truth of their own inner beings. So if we start talking about some subject which is perfectly true from the writings of the faith, but in the wrong order, we can, make the illness and the veils of the soul worse. I was talking to the youth last night. I was saying there was a talk of the Master where he says that the divine teachings of Baha'u'llah and so on are like a medicine chest. We have every remedy for everything, complete. He says he's not fallen short of giving us everything that we need. But the teacher needs to become wise in understanding which are the remedies to apply first, and second, to lead the soul out of their heedlessness and awaken them to the reality of the faith so that they can embrace the cause in its fullness, I remember that the Hand of the Cause of God, Dr. Muhajir was visiting South America. We were with him in Peru, and he gave a press conference. And the press conference was very well received and had some nice articles. But there was a public meeting, and some of these press people also came to the public meeting. And he gave a presentation of the faith, not a very long one. I was translating it into Spanish. And at the end of the meeting, the chairman of the National Assembly, who was chairing the meeting, he asked, would Dr. Muhajir accept some questions from the audience? And I translated that. I was a little apprehensive. I wasn't sure what the audience was going to ask. Dr. Muhajir had given the most beautiful 15-minute presentation of the faith I'd ever heard. He had this terrific inspiration that he'd get. It was so fresh and so vital and so applicable to the audience, and it all worked perfectly. But he said yes, he'd accept a question, so they offered. Any questions? Well, there was an older man sitting down in the front row with a kind of big red nose, and I was afraid what he was going to ask, but he said, well, what do you say about wine? Well, this beautiful meeting, I could just see it going down the tubes, So I translated that to Dr. Muhajir, and he beamed. He said, what a wonderful question. I'm so glad that you've raised that point. He said, the Baha'i writings are full of wine. There's mention of wine all the time through these teachings, he says. And he said that this is a very special wine. You can't get it so easily, But if you get it, it is the most wonderful wine that you can ever find. It's the wine of the love of God, the wine of astonishment. And he says, if you're able to partake of that wine, you won't need the other wine. Next question. This is just a sample of how we have to smoothly move through the subjects of the faith to attract people to the cause. And to do that, we pray and we ask the assistance of God. Help me when I'm teaching, inspire me. He says that, that the hosts of the concourse will come to our aid and we'll be able to say the things that need to be heard. And I think all of us, when we speak about the faith, we need to think about that. I know I always do before a conference like this. Let me say something that everybody's going to find, oh, that's just useful to me. Well, I hope that happens through this conference. Okay. Let us see. We've got evanescence. Death is another stage in the pre-planned stages that God has. We have the prenatal stage, the early stage. Then we have our physical life, and then we have this spiritual life. The spiritual life depends on the spirit of faith, which animates us in such a way, endows us with a new eye and a new ear and a new mind so that we can perceive the kingdom when we go there. Otherwise, those things are still latent. So these three stages are linked together. Abdu'l-Baha says wonderful things about what happens to the spirit of faith and the understanding of divine things in this life, he compares it to the embryonic stage. He said that the soul of man circles around the embryo as it's developing, both assisting it, creating in it capacities, and then endowing those capacities with the wonders of the creation of the embryo as it's growing. He says, so likewise, as we start moving towards the second birth, and you've seen that's of course in Christianity as well, born-again Christians, they've got two second births they have to go through, a second and a third to get where we are. But in any case, we see that he says that as we develop capacity, the gifts of the Spirit enter into our being. So as we begin to take the steps and efforts to bring our lives and our thoughts into alignment with the divine teachings, as we receive inspiration from the divine teachings, then new gifts are added to us. And what we thought was limited capacity, maybe in the beginning, becomes a tremendous capacity. You know the teachings, we all have a fixed capacity, but that capacity can get completely exceeded in terms of a drop becoming an ocean or a gnat becoming an eagle or a river, a sea, all the different likenesses he gives of when there's divine confirmations, then the possibilities of divine assistance and the enlarging of your own capacity has no limits. So it's a terrific thing to strive for. We say the prayers. We ask that the prayers transform us in that manner along the way. What should our response be to the loss of loved ones? We're told that we should follow the middle path, a path of moderation. Of course, it's difficult. We're attached to those that are dear to us, and sometimes the loss of young ones, that's a loss that seems out of the natural order of things, is difficult to bear. But he says that in any case, we should not mourn. We're sober, yes. We're sad. We're saddened from our point of view. But if we could see it from the point of view of the soul that passes on, it's not necessarily a sad thing. They've entered the next realm. Their eyes are opened. Abdu'l-Baha in so many tablets talks about the great blessings that await the souls as they enter the next world. And they are actually detained to some degree by our grief. If our grief is too great, it agitates them in the other world. They're worried about it. Why are they so worried about it? We have the promise in the teachings. They're Baha'is. They should understand, but they don't understand. And we mourn partly because of our great sadness, and sometimes we mourn because it's the form of the society we live in that we have to beat our heads and we have to be extra sad about it. The Baha'is have a more middle position in this. Neither do we rejoice, although martyrs oftentimes ask that their families hold parties for them after they're going to be martyred. I want a celebration. Just the nature of realizing the gift of martyrdom, what a terrific thing it is. You know, he says, seek a martyr's death in my path. All right. He also says, don't provoke the enemies unwisely. You know, I mean, there is that too. But if God chooses you, and sometimes during the lifetime of Baha'u'llah, the believers would write to Baha'u'llah and say, please accept my life as a sacrifice, as a martyrdom. And Baha'u'llah would say that your offering has been accepted, and then the person knows eventually they're going to be martyred somewhere along the way, and that would happen. Or he would say, as he did in the case of Adib Tarzade's father, who asked him for martyrdom, he said, no, you must live a long time to serve the faith. And indeed, he lived into over 100. But then he was also very smart, and he realized since Baha'u'llah had given him that, he could provoke the clergy. So he would say out, wonderful things, but they would be outrageous to the clergy, and they'd be chasing around after him, and he'd disappear again, and they couldn't find him. And he was in Yazd, and some of you know the history of Yazd. It's quite challenging. So that was he played that one for the other side. Loss of loved ones. What's our response? Our response is to pray for them. We're going to be talking a little bit later in one of the later talks about what we can do for those souls. The nature of the hereafter was described in a few passages in a talk that Abdu'l-Baha gave when he was in Scotland. And he talks about the wonderful nature of this next world. And he says, far from those that have passed on forgetting their loved ones, they can observe their loved ones in this life from the other side. We can't see them clearly, but they can see us. They're higher, they see lower. He says they understand the souls in the next world. Some will realize that there are those souls that are below them in spiritual development, some of them that are higher than they are, and some of them that are similar to them. Baha'u'llah gives the principle, like seeks like in the company of its kind. And this applies in the spiritual realm as well. The souls that are similar in development and character will be with each other. And the liars will be together, and the adulterers will all be together. And I don't know whether they're going to enjoy that too much or not, but it's something for us to think about. If we're all spiritual and attracted, and with other souls that are spiritual and attracted, it's going to be an enjoyable kingdom. Otherwise, we're going to have to work our way through some of those shortcomings. And it seems that the souls in the next world cannot progress by their own efforts, but by the mercy of God, by actions of those in this world, they can, by degrees, move forward. And everything has movement to it. It's the nature of creation. It moves forward, whatever that means in the spiritual realm. It means higher and higher levels of perception and understanding. We know, I talked a little earlier about the oil and the lamp that Abdu'l-Baha gives as a sample of. We don't have a choice about when we're born, where we're born, what sex we're born. All of that is predetermined for us. Likewise, the moment of death, we can't choose it. We shouldn't choose it. There's a possibility that we can choose it for ourselves. When I first got to the Holy Land, I think it was Mr. Haney told me, he said that they'd heard that someone asked Shoghi Effendi about suicide. And he had said that suicide is like arriving at a banquet and finding there's no seat at the table. Everybody's enjoying the banquet. Oh, yeah, what are you doing here? I mean, that's kind of a mild way of saying that you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. It doesn't solve your problems. It doesn't solve the problems. The other thing that's strong in the teachings with respect to suicide is that you didn't make yourself, and you don't have the right to take your own life. Taking your own life, in one of the letters, the Master said, is tantamount to murder. You would be very hesitant to murder somebody else, but you think you could take your own life because it belongs to you. But that's not the case. It belongs to God. And it is outside the order of things if people... These are kind of interesting points to recall if you see somebody who's tempted by suicide. Just starch them up a little bit, This is not on. This does not solve problems. The question of accidental deaths, the deaths of children, the deaths in accidents, the deaths of soldiers. Abdu'l-Baha says all of these are covered by an immense series of divine laws and recompenses. That it's not the fault of a soldier that he dies in battle, and we must be obedient to government. We're asked to be excused from killing others, from entering into combat. But if the government doesn't agree, then we obey what the government says. Then the responsibility is the government's and not our own. Individual conscience does not go above that in that particular aspect. Now, if the government says give up your faith, that's another matter. In questions of conscience and faith, we don't submit, we don't obey. But civil law and order, we do. Back to the question of dreams, Abdu'l-Baha says that there's, as I recall, there's 3 kinds of dreams. The first kind is the one that is the product of a nervous response to what you're doing all day long. You have been perhaps involved in some physical activity, mechanical activity over and over all day long, and you go to sleep and you keep doing it in your sleep. Or you were studying chemistry all day long and you go to sleep and you continue studying chemistry in the night and worrying about it and agitated about it. That's one level without major significance. He said the next level of dream is the dream which is symbolic in character. And he said that it requires interpretation. It's not always easy to find the meanings of dreams, but sometimes they become clear fairly quickly. I remember Dr. G. Carey, the hand of the cause, telling me that he and his wife came to breakfast on the 4th of November, 1957, the morning that the guardian passed away. And both of them had a dream that Dr. G. Carey had a dream that he saw Shoghi Effendi standing by a small table with a plate full of coins. And Shoghi Effendi was taking the coins and breaking them and throwing them on the floor. And his wife said, "That's extraordinary. I had a dream which I saw Shoghi Effendi standing, again by a table, with a pile of plates, and he was taking the plates and throwing them to the ground." Within hours, they heard that Shoghi Effendi had passed away and flew on from Switzerland, where they were, to London, where the arrangements for his interment and the first meetings of the Hands of the Cause of God, the first conclave and so on. So those things, sometimes the meaning of horses, the meanings of snakes, all kinds of things, they have some meaning. He said, Abdu'l-Baha did say you could consult the books of the ancients about some of the interpretations. These things seem to hold solid over centuries. There are certain kinds of symbols that come into dreams. And of course, I suppose we could pray for the understanding of the dream likewise. The third level of dreams, the Master said, are perfectly clear. They're oftentimes involve the prophets, or maybe they involve Abdu'l-Baha, and they're as clear as crystal. They're mostly would be a warm embrace or a loving view of the manifestation. And if those are happy, we can trust that they are true attainment to divine presence, momentary attainment to divine presence. I think probably many of you have some wonderful things to say about such experiences in this life. There was something else I wanted to say about dreams. Anyway, we'll come back to that then. We read a little bit about these infinite worlds of God, that even in the physical realm, all these stars are not void of planets nor inhabitants. It's hard for us at this stage. We don't have yet the understanding of it, but science is bringing us to a realization that there are many solar systems similar to our own, and that there's bound to be a certain percentage of them that have conditions very similar to our own planet. And Baha'u'llah has affirmed that all of those have creatures. But those creatures are made up according to the constituent elements of those planets. So this is all of a terrific kind of a nursery, developing souls, rational souls, that then go on to the next world. And in the next world, surely there will be a gradual further unification and meeting of souls there. We'll recognize our loved ones. They see us in this world. When they look back from that world, they see us not in physical terms, but in spiritual terms. They can see the state of our soul. And when they see that we're shrouded and darkened, they pray for divine assistance. They pray for our healing. Or they may see us bright and luminous, teaching the cause. Then they rejoice, and they praise God for such a thing. And we know that the relatives of the believers are endowed with special favors. When they go to the next world, they receive, the parents, for example, receive the mantle of forgiveness if they haven't already accepted the cause, which is, I think, a relief for some of us whose parents didn't seem to make the way the same as we would want them to. And then they understand on the other side the importance of what we're doing here and what we have been involved in. This ripples out to other relatives. And Abdu'l-Baha prays, he says, I pray that your antepasados, the relatives you have that have gone on their way, and also your descendants that are yet to come, may be blessed by the effects of your having recognized the revelation at this time. So there's a kind of interaction of these blessings that works between our own state of spirituality and acceptance and radiance, and those that have gone before us, and those that we will leave, progeny that we will leave in the world after us. I think we can understand that these worlds, every one of these worlds, the center of it is the prophet of God, is the manifestation of God. We don't ever attain to the essence of God. He's always represented. He will be represented in ever more glorious terms, depending how clarified our own sight and spiritual purity becomes. Then we see him in greater clarity, and we understand and can approach him there. Concerning the future life, this is from Shoghi Effendi, what Baha'u'llah says is that the soul will continue to ascend through many worlds. What those worlds are and what their nature is, we cannot know. The same way the child in the matrix cannot know this world, so we cannot know what the other world is going to be. The nature of the next world is, in a sense, similar to this one because of correspondence, the whole science of correspondence. That is, the reality of everything that exists here exists on the other side. And this is a mere semblance of it, or a reflection of it. So, likewise, all the conditions that we see in this world, we find also in the next world. Heaven and hell. We oftentimes hear Baha'is say that we don't believe in heaven and hell. That's true. We don't believe heaven and hell are physical places. That's basically what, as I understand, is what the teaching is about that. But we do believe in the condition of heaven and hell, and the teachings say that that pertains to each soul. And it pertains not only to the next world, but to this world. You can live in hell while you're in this world. Thank you. And you can also go to the next world and experience that kind of, it's nearness and farness from the manifestation, which is the nearness to God, or the distance or veiling of the soul from approaching the manifestation. The one sin that's not forgiven is he says, is blasphemy against the Holy Ghost. In other words, if you stand opposed to the Holy Ghost, in Christian terms, or if you're opposed to the spirit of the manifestation, you can have trouble with his personality in this world and you can be okay, but not with his divine reality. If that offends you and you turn away from that, he said, there's no remedy for that. Then the soul really isolates itself. I suppose maybe those praying for it from this side might be able to assist, but certainly the soul, by its own effort, is shutting itself out. With regard to this correspondence between that world and this world, from the Master, in a tablet, he says there are two books. One is the book of creation, and the other is the written book. The written book consists of the heavenly books, which are revealed to the prophets of God and have issued forth from the lips of his manifestations. The book of creation is the preserved tablet and the outspread roll of existence. The book of creation is in accord with the written book. In the written book thou canst find chapters and verses, words and letters, and inner meanings and mysteries are hidden therein. Likewise, the book of creation is the command of God and the repository of divine mysteries. In it there are great signs, universal images, perfect words, exalted symbols, the secrets of things, whether of the past or of the future. When thou readest the written book, thou wilt become aware of the mysteries of God. But when thou gazest at the book of creation, thou wilt observe the signs, symbols, realities, and reflections of the hidden mysteries of the bounties of His holiness, the incomparable one. There are letters, words, and verses in both these worlds, and they're in perfect correspondence. So as you study sciences and the workings of the world of nature, that helps you to understand the verses and words of the revealed books. And as you reveal the revealed Word of God, it inspires you to penetrate and make new discoveries in the fields of science, material sciences in this world. The whole nature, Abdu'l-Baha says, of this world is education. Everything that exists here, there's nothing, divine economy is perfect. There's nothing extra here. Everything that's here is to educate us. Sometimes through suffering, sometimes through blessings, but the whole scheme of it is to prepare us to be the kind of fruit that is ripe when it enters the next world. How are we doing for time here? Did anybody collect those questions yet? Who's got control of? I'm not going to have to slip here, I'm sorry. What time is this session supposed to finish? 3:45. All right, we have a few more minutes. Do the ushers have questions, cards already collected? If not, you can give them some. We'll deal with those later in the afternoon session, and tomorrow we should have another opportunity to face that. There were a couple of things I wanted to read to finish this session. Let's see if I can find them here. When you think of what Shoghi Effendi refers to in the heavenly realm as the reunion of these glorious teachers of the cause, the outstanding disciples of Abdu'l-Baha and the great teachers, most of them were women. And Shoghi Effendi gives us some insight into the nature of the hereafter by his messages with regard to those souls when they pass. Trying to remember the term, it's gone out of my head. What is it of the galaxy of Baha'i immortals, he calls it, in the next realm. And he names off the participants in those. In one survey, there's only one man, and that's Hai Dun, who was open to faith in Australia. But it has such people as Martha Root, and Lua, and eventually Juliet Thompson, and Keith Ransom Kaler, and Ella Bailey, these great heroines of the cause who they gave their all, whatever it was. By giving their all, they attained this exalted state. He doesn't ask more from you than your all. That's the safe route. That's moderation in Baha'i terms. So when we've heard the story that in the Holy Land, when May Maxwell, who traveled to South America, 70 years of age, in ill health, and visited the communities down the eastern side of South America, through Brazil, and finally to Uruguay, and lastly to Buenos Aires. When she arrived there, she was just there one day, and then that next night she had a heart attack and she passed away. And her blessed remains are there in Buenos Aires. And I'd heard the story, we'd heard the story at that time, that Shoghi Effendi spoke about the station of the teachers of the cause at the pilgrim table, with Ruhi Khanum present. And May Maxwell being Ruhi Khanum's mother, Shoghi Effendi had the news of her passing. He didn't tell her directly. He spoke about the greatness of what happens in the next world when souls like this go to the next world. And then he announced that your mother has now attained this great honor. He wrote on the occasion of the passing of May Maxwell, and this was a letter he sent to Iran, where he was oftentimes, he was the true brother to the West, but he was the king of the Baha'i community to the Iranians. And he spoke with this power. He said, "The severed teacher, firebrand of the love of God and spreader of the fragrances of God, Mrs. Maxwell, forsook her native land and hastened to the most distant countries out of love for her master and yearning to sound the call to the cause of her Lord and her inspiration, until she ascended to the highest summit, attaining the rank of martyrdom in the capital of Argentina, the furthermost boundary. The countenances of paradise invoke blessings upon her in the glorious apex, saying, may she enjoy with healthy relish the cup that is full and brimming over with the wine of the love of God. For the sake of this, should the travailers travail, inform all the friends of the announcement of this mighty victory." Previous to that, on the occasion of the passing of Miss Martha Root, who, as you know, is been designated by him as the archetype of travel teacher for East and West, men and women, young and old, of all races. October 18th, 1939, he cabled to Iran, "The pure leaf and renowned teacher, sign of severance, torch of love and tenderness, standard of courage and faithfulness, consolation of the eyes of the people of Baha, Martha Root, has ascended to the highest summits of paradise." The people of the Supreme Concourse came forth to meet her with the shout, "Welcome to thee, O pride of men and women teachers! Well done, thou who hast spent thy whole being in devotion to the kingdom of the Lord of signs and utterances. Blessed, a thousandfold blessed art thou within this shining, proud, and lofty station. Inform all the friends of the necessity of calling special meetings in all the provinces for 2 full weeks to honor her exalted station." These 2 souls did what we're told all to do. Arise and spend all your energies teaching the faith of God. Pour it out. So we say, may the travailers travail. These are the opportunities before us. I mean, none of these, May Maxwell was sick all the time. She didn't say, "Oh, I'm sick, so I can't go." She went anyway. Martha Root was, she didn't have any means. There's a tablet written that says that if you arise in the right spirit, you don't need material means. They will come to you. They will be provided. And there are people and there are stages in different Baha'is' lives that you see that. Did you ever hear of any Baha'i starving to death? Any pioneer starving to death? I've heard of some hungry ones. I've had a few moments like that myself, but it never lasted very long. There's support. There's a level of spirit of faith, the height of fidelity, the height of faithfulness, where it attracts divine confirmations and solves problems for you. Martha Root arrived one time by steamship from Hawaii and San Francisco. She had an engagement on the night she came there to speak to a group of people. And she says, I arrived there, I had no money. I had one dime that I used to pay for the streetcar to get to the Baha'i meeting with my suitcase, which she carried a very small suitcase with one change of clothing and so on to travel lightly. She'd fit right in with the modern airline practices here, but in any case, she had that with her, and she went to this meeting and she gave a talk, a beautiful Baha'i talk, to a group of seekers that were there, people that were there at that meeting in San Francisco. And she's saying, okay, Baha'u'llah, I'm in your hands now. At the end of the meeting, a society lady came up and she said, I'm here with my family, but not all of the people are here. And this is such a glorious message. I beg of you, if you will consider to come with me now in my car to my country home and spend a few weeks and rest after your travels and share these teachings with my family. Okay. She had that kind of experience over and over again. And she used to say that I have to say the Tablet of Ahmad continually. You know, she was ushered into the presence of presidents and kings and Queen Marie of Romania, who was so stirred by her call that she became the first Baha'i queen, the first royalty to accept the faith. Wonderful services that she did. Can you imagine? She just continually made the Guardian happy. There's an interesting thing that the Guardian said after her passing. He said that so much of what she planted was lost because the administrative order hadn't been developed. That now we have an order, we have a way of things to hold the product of the teachers of the cause. Of course, I think the effects of that kind of teaching are long-lasting. He talks about the harvest that Martha Root, who was the first travel teacher to go to South America, just after the unveiling of the Divine Plan in New York City, she took right off and visited all the cities along the eastern coast of South America. And then she crossed the Andes Mountains. You'd have to fly over them sometime to know what it is to cross those on a donkey, on a horse and donkey, through the winter passes and into the other side. Amazing kind of experience that she must have had. She said she was scared to death. The horse would, or the mule or whatever it was, would keep slipping. She said, I spent so many greatest names on that trip. Yabba. Somehow she got through and she taught the faith in the capital of Chile and caught a ship up the east coast. And Abdul Baha said that, you know, the harvest would come from all of that later. But you would say, how did she go? She was a newspaper lady. She didn't know Spanish and Portuguese. But she would go and find the mayor of the towns that they stopped in and the head of the newspaper and proclaim this faith. And they would organize meetings for thousands of people along the way because this was new and exciting and they had a visitor. She had terrific confirmations. Being the right place at the right time. The divine plan, the unveilment of the divine plan, took place after the war. The tablets didn't come to the States until 1919. There was a convention in New York, and each of the tablets of these 14 tablets of the divine plan were put on an easel, and they had little curtains in front of them. And some of the young creatures in the community, the young girls, were assigned the task of unveiling the tablets, and they had strings they'd pull, and then the curtains would come open. And Ria Khanum told us she was one of those little girls that unveiled one of the tablets there on that occasion. Very quaint. The American National Assembly here has those original copies of the tablets of the divine plan. And so think of that in the history of mankind. You talk about Magna Cartas and various documents of the past that are so revered. What will it be like, these tablets of the divine plan? And how this community was blessed because of its backwardness and materialistic ways with receiving these tablets is extraordinary. How God had chosen that these people who were so attached to their comforts and things should be called upon to give up everything and go out to all the different places of the world. And the story of the Knights of Baha'u'llah is all about that. Severance from refrigerators. Now there's many more things, we're lucky with many more things we can detach ourselves from now to go teaching. You know, when you go into the field, some of the areas, you can't go with a wristwatch. You go with a wristwatch, that becomes the center of attention to the whole tribe. I remember how many times I had to put my rings and wristwatch in my pocket to go and teach the faith in some tribal area in South America. Then all that's left is the old ladies come up to you and start pulling the hairs out of your arm. Look, they say, he's got hairs on his arm. Then you try gradually to steer the conversation to spiritual matters. They do have an innate sense of spirituality, so many of those people became, the foundation of that was established there. And Rhea Khanum herself spent time going to all those very difficult places so that no Baha'i lady can say, well, that's not really a lady's work, or, well, how can I go? You can't expect me to go to places like that. If Rhea Khanum can go to those places, I think everybody else can go. Never mind the men who are supposed to be able to do those kind of things too. So in the great tradition, preparing yourself for the hereafter and thinking about that, I hope you'll recall the marvelous sacrifices of those who've gone before. Read about their examples, benefit from that, and mark your own course of history. Thank you.